Let me tell you about a moment that changed how one family understood money forever. It's 1923, Berlin. A man named Hugo Stinnes walks into a bank. He's carrying a briefcase, not full of cash, but full of contracts, mortgage contracts, land deeds, mining rights. While the rest of Germany is literally burning banknotes for warmth because they cost less than firewood, Hugo Stinnes is the richest man in the country. He owns coal mines, steel mills, newspapers, hotels, and enough real estate to form his own small nation. He didn't get rich during the hyperinflation. He got rich because of it, and almost nobody understood what he had done until it was too late. This is not ancient history. This is not a curiosity from a world that no longer exists. The strategies Stinnes used, and that the wealthy have used in every inflationary crisis from Weimar Germany to 1980s, Argentina to Zimbabwe in the 2000s, are the same strategies being discussed in private wealth management offices right now. The playbook hasn't changed, only the names and the currencies have. Today, we're going to open that playbook. Before we talk about protection, we need to understand the mechanism of destruction. Hyperinflation is not just prices going up. It is a complete collapse of the social contract embedded in money. Money is, at its core, a promise, a deferred claim on real goods and real labor. When a government prints currency faster than the economy produces goods, it is, in effect, quietly stealing the value of every promise that was ever made in that currency. Wages, savings, pensions, bonds, life insurance policies. Everything denominated in the currency becomes worth less, sometimes within days. During the Weimar hyperinflation of 1921 to 1923, the exchange rate went from roughly 4 marks to the dollar to 4.2 trillion marks to the dollar. A loaf of bread that cost 250 marks in January 1923 cost 200 billion marks by November. A worker's weekly paycheck, if he waited until Friday to cash it, might buy only a fraction of what it would have bought on Monday. The people who were destroyed were precisely the people who did everything right. The middle class, the savers, the pensioners, the workers with fixed wages, the teachers, the civil servants, the very people who had played by the rules of a society that suddenly didn't care about rules anymore. And the people who thrived? They had known something the middle class did not. The foundational insight of every wealthy family that survived hyperinflation is this: paper burns, things don't. When currency collapses, what retains value is whatever the currency was originally a claim on. Land, buildings, machinery, farmland, commodities, timber, mines, things you can touch, things that exist regardless of what any government decides to print. Hugo Stinnes had understood this before the hyperinflation even started. He borrowed enormous sums of money in marks to buy physical industrial assets. Then inflation came, and something remarkable happened. His debts, denominated in marks, became essentially worthless. He owed millions of marks that were now worth almost nothing in real terms. But his steel mills and coal mines still produced steel and coal which he could sell for whatever currency was valid that day, or barter for goods of equivalent value. He had essentially borrowed paper and repurchased it with something real. The inflation didn't hurt him, it paid him. The same dynamic played out in Argentina during the hyperinflation of 1989, when prices rose over 3,000% in a single year. The families who had converted their peso holdings into farmland, or into property in Uruguay, or into hard assets of any kind, watched their neighbors suffer while their own wealth, measured in real terms, remained largely intact. The lesson: if you borrow in inflating currency and hold real assets, inflation transfers wealth to you from creditors and from anyone holding cash. The second tool in the playbook is one governments actively try to prevent, because it amounts to a vote of no confidence in the national currency: foreign exchange, hard currency, moving money outside the jurisdiction before the walls go up. In Venezuela, starting around 2013 as Bolivar inflation began to accelerate, wealthy families had already been quietly converting Bolivar holdings into dollars, euros, and Colombian pesos. Some held these accounts in Miami, some in Panama, some in Colombia or Spain. By the time ordinary Venezuelans were struggling to buy basic food, and the government had imposed strict currency controls that made legal exchange nearly impossible, these families were insulated. Their wealth existed in a currency that still meant something. This is not a Venezuelan story. It's a human story. It happened in Argentina. It happened in Zimbabwe. It happened in Hungary after World War II, when the pengo experienced the most extreme hyperinflation in recorded history, prices doubling every 15 hours at its peak. Those who had dollars, Swiss francs, or gold were survivors. Everyone else was left with wheelbarrows full of paper. The wealthy move early. That's the thing governments and mainstream financial commentary almost never say plainly. By the time currency controls are implemented, by the time the government restricts foreign exchange, by the time ordinary citizens realize what is happening, the wealthy have already moved. The exit doors don't close on them because they left before the alarm went off. Gold is almost too obvious to mention, which is perhaps why it gets dismissed. And yet, in every single hyperinflationary episode in modern history, physical gold has preserved purchasing power. Not gold ETFs, not gold futures contracts, physical gold. In Zimbabwe, during the hyperinflationary spiral from 2007 to 2009, when the government printed a $100 trillion note that couldn't buy a loaf of bread, the informal gold market thrived. People who held physical gold could buy food, medicine, and petrol. People who held Zimbabwe dollars could not. In Weimar Germany, the famous story of the Rentenmark, the new currency introduced in November 1923 to end the hyperinflation, was backed explicitly by real assets, by land and industrial property. The government itself acknowledged what the market had known all along. Currency must be grounded in something real to mean anything. There's a reason that central banks, the very institutions that manage currency, hold enormous reserves of gold. The Bank of England holds it. The Federal Reserve holds it. The Bundesbank holds it. Germany, notably, spent years demanding the repatriation of its gold from New York and Paris vaults. They wanted it home, on German soil, where they could touch it. The wealthy individual follows the same instinct. When paper becomes uncertain, weight becomes comfort. Beyond real estate and gold, there's a subtler move that sophisticated wealth managers have always understood. Ownership stakes in businesses that produce things people need regardless of the price level. Energy companies, agricultural producers, water utilities, basic food manufacturers, transportation infrastructure. During inflation, companies that produce essential commodities can raise their prices in tandem with inflation. Their revenues go up. Their real earnings are protected. This is why in every inflationary period you see concentration of share ownership in these sectors among the wealthiest investors, while speculative technology or growth stocks, whose value depends on future cash flows discounted at low interest rates, collapse. John D. Rockefeller built Standard Oil into a monument partly because oil is a commodity the world cannot function without. The mechanism that protected Rockefeller's wealth wasn't magic. It was the fact that his business sold something real at whatever price the market demanded, in whatever currency was circulating. The currency was irrelevant. The oil was not. In Argentina's 2001 crisis and subsequent inflationary spiral, the businesses that survived and whose owners thrived were overwhelmingly in agriculture, energy, and export commodities. The soybean farmers of the Pampas, paid in dollars on the global market while their costs remained partially in pesos, found themselves in an almost impossibly favorable position. Here is the uncomfortable truth at the center of all of this. Every strategy we've discussed works brilliantly if you act before the crisis is obvious, which means, and this is the part that almost never gets said plainly in public, the protection of wealth during hyperinflation is fundamentally a game of information asymmetry and early access. The wealthy get out early because they have better information networks. They have private bankers who tell them what is happening before it becomes news. They have political connections that give them insight into government policy before it's announced. They have financial advisors whose only job is to watch for systemic currency risk. And critically, they have enough existing capital that they can afford to act on early warnings to move money, to buy property, to convert holdings, without needing to time the market perfectly. The ordinary middle-class family in Weimar Germany, or Zimbabwe, or Venezuela, didn't act early because they had no early signal. They watched prices go up. They assumed it was temporary. They waited. And by the time it was undeniable, by the time it was obvious that the currency was in genuine freefall, the exit doors were crowded and partially closed. The playbook isn't secret because it's complicated. It's secret because it requires resources and information that are not evenly distributed. We are not currently in hyperinflation, let that be stated clearly. But the inflationary period of the early 2020s reminded a generation of people, many of whom had never experienced serious inflation, that the purchasing power of money is not guaranteed. That savings accounts paying near zero interest in a period of 7 or 8% inflation are quietly losing real value. That the social contract embedded in money is only as good as the institutional discipline that maintains it. The wealthy have always known this. They have always allocated toward real assets, hard currency, commodity-linked equity, and physical stores of value as a matter of instinct. An instinct bred by generations of family memory that includes the memory of collapse. The historian Niall Ferguson once observed that one of the defining characteristics of great fortunes is that they survive crisis, and that they often expand during crisis, because the wealthy buy distressed assets from the desperate at pennies on the dollar. That is not a conspiracy. It is a consequence of positioning. The Weimar millionaires bought the savings of the middle class, converted into worthless paper for almost nothing, and turned them into steel and land that lasted for generations. Whether you find that inspiring or troubling probably depends on which side of that transaction you're on. History suggests the time to decide and to act is before the crisis begins, not after. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.